I'm really glad to welcome you to our second annual Move Utah Summit. This event is the only of its kind that brings together hundreds of health, transportation, and land use experts and state and local officials to collaborate on improving the health and well-being of Utah communities. Please join me in giving a round of applause to all of our sponsors for this event. I have some quick announcements. Some of you may have seen the screen, but our internet password is Move Utah. A lot of you have been asking about parking validation, and we won't shame you, but if you do need parking validation, just go up to the registration desk and ask, and they have those validations for you. We're not handing them out like candy, so if you do need one, you'll have to ask for it. Again, we have a big commitment to go paperless at UDOT. So this year, we're trying to save some trees, and we have a digital agenda. So feel free to go to the website, find that content through your Eventbrite registration as well. Also, I hope that many of you can stay with us through the end of the day and go on a mobile tour and either walk, scoot, or go and find a green bike and join us to go see a new really cool intersection here in Salt Lake City. Additionally, we have the end of the day reception. So if you do have some time at the end of the day, it would be great to stay and mingle and network and help make a connection. And so moving on, this year's theme is Make a Connection. We've tailored all of today's content to help us more clearly see the intersection of transportation, land use, and health. How we plan and build our communities truly matters. Where we live and how we get around matters. I hope many of you are able to make social connections today and make cognitive connections regarding the diverse content that we explore today. There's been a tremendous amount of time and attention to our many roadways at the Utah Department of Transportation. As we face growth and many development pressures, for our future, we recognize that there's a great role in preserving our quality of life and setting new visions for our transportation future. Our focus is now to move people, not cars. This morning, we're privileged to have Carlos Braceras. Carlos is the Executive Director of the Utah Department of Transportation, and he also serves as the President of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. Carlos will talk today about how we are evolving to meet our transportation visions and help build the community of our dreams. Please join me in welcoming Carlos Braceras.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to see where Heidi and the team have taken the initiative here to get Utah moving, keep Utah moving, and as part of that, the Move Utah program. I think it's excellent, and I will just share a few thoughts here this morning. And unlike Heidi, I was not smart enough to go paperless today, so I have a piece of paper, so don't shame me too much here. You know, I like to start off with, usually starting off with the why we do certain things. And so I thought I'd start off with just a little thought on, for me, what is my perfect day? And if some of you joined us a couple weeks ago for the Success Conference, we talked about our history when we started working on the Olympics. So we started off by laying out what we called the perfect Olympic day. What are those elements that make that perfect day? And so for me, this last, if it depends on what season it is, but what I would typically like to get done is I'd like to go up and ski at Snowbird and get 5 or 6 trams in, come down, get 30 or 40 miles in on my road bike, or go out down to the point of the mountain, Traverse Mountain, ride my mountain bike, and then maybe in the evening go out and go for a sail on the Great Salt Lake. And you think about all of those different activities pieced together, where in the world can you pull something off like that other than Utah? And we live in the most amazing place. And all of those elements really have something in common. It's very active, it's outdoors, and it's moving. And so when I think about what are we doing in the transportation world to help people create that perfect day for them, that perfect vision for them, I think it starts to frame the why we're here today and why what we do is so important. So just as we look at what our vision is in the department, so a vision statement for an organization is that what do you have to do to be successful in the future as an organization. It's really where you're going. And as a department, we've had this vision statement now since 2013, keeping Utah moving. And when I do new employee orientations, I meet with our new employees every 2 weeks, and we go through really, what are we doing, why do we do it, how do we do it, those types of things. I talk about the vision, and I say, when we talk about keeping Utah moving, yes, it's about moving cars and trucks, but it's also about moving trains and buses. It's about moving planes, but it's also about moving pedestrians and moving bicyclists. It's this whole idea that we need to create this transportation system all working together. And at the same time as we rolled out our transportation vision, we rolled out our mission. And so when you think about what's the mission of an organization, that's the why you exist. Why does the Department of Transportation exist? And we went back and we did a lot of history, and we started asking the question, why was any transportation system in the world ever developed? And it was really around the collection of these ideas of growing an economy and improving the quality of life. And so this has been the vision, the mission of why we say we exist. So behind everything we do, we try to remember this is what we're supposed to be achieving as an organization, not only as a single organization, but with all of our partners. And I'll be honest, for years, the easy side of this equation was to talk about, I'm an engineer equation, okay? The easy side of this was to talk about the economy. The economy is a very good motivator. It's a big driver behind everything that I think we do in our state. We very much want to create an economic engine so that our people can be prosperous and our children can find those great jobs and stay close to home. Helping Utah grow economically and as a country as well. But we really struggled with this whole idea of what is quality of life and what does it mean to individuals, what does it mean to organizations, because from a perspective of quality of life, it can change from person to person, but it can also change. That single person could have different elements. You could ask them on Monday in the morning, what's a quality of life element? It might be get that congestion out of my way so I don't have to deal with traffic. But on a Friday afternoon, it might be, I want to be able to have a nice walk in the park and, with my family. And so you can have this moving target on what quality of life is. So we really struggled around what that meant. And so it's something that we were not doing as good a job on trying to figure out how do we connect our work to that quality of life element. And so I wanted to just keep advancing this conversation. And those of you that come to our annual conference every year, we have a very nice conference. We bring together transportation professionals, and we try to figure out how we can get better at what we do so that we can do a better job for the public. And last year, we wanted to advance this concept. We introduced the concept of community of our dreams. So what is those elements that make this community that you would want to live in, where you'd want to raise your families, and where you'd want to be able to grow old in? And so we did this word cloud thing, and so we had over 2,000 people, and we did this live. We had no idea what types of words we were going to get up, but had a pretty good sense, knowing most of the people and the type of people we work with. I got a sense it was going to be positive, I was hoping, because the bigger the words and the thicker the lettering is, the more often people had used those words in describing what the community of their dreams was. And, so we threw this thing up there, and, this is the words that we got, and so this was, I'm standing at the stage, the screens are behind me, and they turn it on, and I'm like, okay, so what did they say? And, so you start looking at things like safe and clean and walkable and connected. They just kind of jump out at you. And, I was really pleased to see that these were those elements that people were looking for. You didn't really see big things like bigger roads or, really nice bridges, things that engineers like to do. You saw those elements that were important to people, right? And so this was really helpful for us as a department to start to advance this conversation about what are we trying to achieve? What is quality of life for our citizens? And so this was all part of this evolution for us. And what was nice is we're able to take this type of information and advance it forward. So, we think in Utah, and, we're a little biased as the DOT, we think we have the best road system in the country. We really do. We also think we have the best transit system in the country. We also think we have the best pedestrian and bicycling system in the country. But are they as well connected? Are they as well integrated as they could be? Have we been talking from a system perspective? thinking about the journey as opposed to these individual siloed transportation system. And I'll share a story. I was sitting at dinner, I'm not even going to tell you how many years ago, with the Minister of Transport for Sweden. And she said something that, to me, it still sticks with me. And she was talking about their organization and what their purpose was. And she says, we're a travel agency. And, I immediately thought of the person I'm calling up to book my airline flight. And she's saying, no, we're about the journey. It's all about the journey, no matter how people want to make it. And they use the word journey in a way that we don't typically do. And so I think that's a very fundamental concept for us to think about. Regardless of how you move in transportation, it's really about an integrated system. And it's really about where people are trying to get to. And so as we do this, everything in life doesn't get easier, does it? Everything gets a little harder. And to be able to solve these hard problems, these complex problems, you got to do it with people, and you got to do it with more people than you've ever done it before, and you have to do it with much more diverse organizations than you've ever done it before. So you think about the types of partners that we have. We've always worked very closely with the Utah Transit Authority, and I can go back over the last 30 years and point to successes where we've partnered together to be able to achieve successes on both the transit and the roadway side of things. But working with organizations like Get Healthy Utah, our 4 MPOs and metropolitan planning organizations around the state, the Salt Lake Chamber, the Governor's Office of Economic Development Corp of Utah, the Department of Environmental Quality, and then all of our consultants and contractors. When you think about what it's going to take to be successful, it's going to take looking around the room, and not only asking, are we all here, but thinking about who's not here. Who do we need to bring in to this discussion? And when you start to bring in these diverging groups and people with different opinions, you start to get it gets a little messy. You tend not to be on this straight linear path and trying to get to your end goal at a certain pace. You have to be prepared for differences, and you have to encourage differences. You have to allow that quiet person that might have a different opinion, but there's a couple strong people, with strong thoughts over on this side of the table. You have to be that facilitator to say, hey, wait a minute. We haven't heard from Frank over here. Frank, what are your thoughts? And we need to create that safe place where they're able to say what they believe and what they believe in. And so we were asked by the legislature in 2018 to create these strategic initiatives for what are we trying to achieve with the state transportation dollars that we're investing. And so we're starting to think about, well, how do you do this? And so we brought together these diverse groups. And we thought, well, to start this type of conversation, we need to start it with something that we all believe in. And so we all shared our strategic goals, our mission statements, our values. And we started trying to find what are those shared things, those values that we share together. And, when we got into our first meeting, we go into this thing, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen. We had the governor to start us off, and then I said, you might want to leave after this because it's going to be messy. And it just went around, and it was all constructive, good intent conversation, but it was kind of shooting off all over the place. And it wasn't until an individual in that room started using the word quality of life and talking about what it meant that we started to all coalesce around this idea that maybe that's what our strategic initiative needs to be. Maybe that's what we need to shoot for, is this idea of quality of life. And, so that's what our strategic planning initiative, our strategic vision for transportation boiled down to, this idea of quality of life. Now, again, I'll go back to where I started. What does that mean? What does that mean for Department of Transportation? How do we use that when we're doing our paving jobs or our traffic signal jobs, or we're pushing snow? How does any of that make a difference? And so the group kept working on this, and they really came down to 4 different dimensions of what that means. And you start looking at what this is so with our transportation investments, we're trying to create a better quality of life for the state of Utah. But those things that we need to start moving that will improve that quality of life are things like good health. Good health. So when did we in transportation talk about good health? We always talk about better mobility, right? But strong economy, yeah, we believe in that. But connected communities. And the idea of what that means for a community to be connected. And the thing is, this is different for every community. You can't take a template on what a connected community is and roll in and say, this is what it is. So it's going to take a very much a different approach to how we do transportation. And so this really gives us something to work with. It gives us something to ask questions about for communities. And if you think about those of you that have been around for a while, I saw an old friend he used to work with Salt Lake City, and he'll probably say, yes, that's the way UDOT was. Tim is somewhere here. But we used to come in for projects, and we knew best. And we'd come into a community, and we said, we know how to solve your transportation problems, and here's what we got to do. Because you know what? We know how to do this. And we knew how to do it from our perspective. And when I think about what that must have sounded like and how offensive that must have been to the communities to have us come in that way, I'm just amazed we weren't thrown out of more. We were thrown out of a few, but I'm amazed we weren't thrown out of more public meetings. So it's really important for us to think about how we're going to help all of our people try to pull everyone along. And that's important. Everyone here is a leader, and you're leading this change that we're going through as a transportation community. And when we lead, we don't push. Because when you push, you upset people. People don't like to be pushed. People like to be led. And so it's really important to think about how we do this. If we want to create something that's sustainable, past individuals, because we can't rely on a single individual to carry this message over the years, over the decades. If you want to make meaningful change, you need to change a culture. So we need to think about how we do this a little bit. So that changing of a culture, it's tough. Because when you start talking to your employees in a large organization, and you start to talk about these things that maybe don't connect directly to what they've always believed success was for them, then you start to maybe send a dual message of, yeah, he's saying this, but I'm going to be measured by getting my project done on schedule, on budget. And that's really what matters. And so as an organization, you have to be crystal clear on really what you're trying to achieve. And so it's been it's taking a little longer than we may have wanted to do it. But I think one of the things I've recognized is success in life doesn't come from really those really brilliant people that have a really good idea. Success comes from those that see that good idea, but will never give up and will keep pushing forward and I use the word push, right? Keep pulling forward, individually pushing yourself, but pulling people with you is how I'll do it. So we are trying to transform. We are transforming our organization, and I hope you feel we're doing it in the right way. We're doing it with the right teams, and you all want to be part of this. And maybe part of an example is to share an example of how we're trying to do this within our organization. Heidi, can I embarrass you? She's in a tough position. I've got the slide control here. So, so one of the things you got to do is, you have to have people try to understand why we want to do this. And so Heidi was able to, with Tiffany Pocock, to be able to pull together a pre-construction design workshop. Now, pre-construction engineers are, some of you are, some are them, I'm sure, but you can probably picture what they are. I was a great pre-construction engineer. I used to love to design, and I didn't have a pocket protector, but my grandfather did, and my wife has threatened to buy me one for every Christmas, and I don't think she's gotten me one yet, Carlton, at least not one that I've been willing to wear. But they brought these hardcore engineers together, and the hardcore engineers, they went out and rode scooters, rode bikes, and some of these folks didn't look all that comfortable on bicycles and scooters, but at the end of the day, they all said they had one word for how they described it. It was fun. In fact, one individual was so motivated, he was motivated after just this one experience that he said he wanted to get healthy, and he realized to get healthy he needed to be more active, and he wanted to do this so that he could participate with his children in those active sports. And so you start to think about that. You know, if you can transform an individual, think about what we can do if we can transform a community, if we can transform a state. It's really potentially a very powerful thing, and we can create just a happier place to be for all of us. So just in conclusion, you know, I hope you don't think it's too lofty for me to say that we can create a happier community through transportation. I might be a little biased. You know, I think we can do just about anything if we do transportation in the right way. So I am very much committed to helping our organization work with all organizations to make Utah really the happiest place to live. And just as we close up here, I like to think about, you know, sometimes transportation, we work in a difficult position because we really only get noticed when it doesn't work. And so it's hard for people to see the positive sometimes in the business that we work in. And it's hard to work in a business where people are always criticizing it because they notice us when it doesn't work, right? Every single time. And so you're getting that feedback, which is important. We need that feedback. But I think about transportation much like we would think about the circulatory system in your body. You know, when it's working, you're probably not sitting there right now thinking about your circulatory system, I'm guessing. But if it wasn't quite working, you would really be focused on that. And so when we think about transportation, I think of it much like that circulatory system. But when you think about what the blood is and, the people that make it work, it's you. You know, all we are is a system of pipes, whatever that system might be, but it's the people that use it, it's the people that create it, it's the people that help facilitate it that really make it work. So together, all of us together, we can create the healthiest, happiest place for our communities to live. And I believe that is what would be the community of our dreams, the dreams that all of you have for where you want to live and what you're so proud of. So for all of you, I just say thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment, and let's keep doing this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. We're bringing back the wellness succulents if you were here last year, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So next we have a morning plenary session. We've compiled, if you guys want to start making your way to the stage, a really awesome composition of panelists who have amazing expertise in transportation, land use, health, and economic development. All of these elements are key components of Utah's transportation vision and how we're moving Utah towards a pathway of life quality. So please welcome to the stage our panelists and our facilitator, Elizabeth Waite.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. I had the privilege of coming last year, and you may remember that I was very, very excited about being here. I think I said it 20 times. I remain very excited, so you'll get to hear more about that. It's a pleasure to follow Carlos because he is a true visionary. It's so exciting to work for him because he lays out ideas and this picture of the future that's so inspiring. And you heard his Freudian slip. He mostly pulls, but every once in a while he makes a well-placed nudge, and that's what we need. He's always been ahead of the curve, so you heard him talk about our mission statement, which went into place 6 years ago. And even though the conversation was about strong economy, quality of life made it into that statement, and it's become a part of our dialogue. Now, you also heard him talk about community of our dreams. He talked about that last year in his annual conference. And another privilege of working for him as the director of communications is that I had a very busy year trying to explain to people what that means. I got a lot of questions, but I was lucky. The stars aligned because the next month after he gave that speech, the U Vision effort started. And an outcome of that has been the quality of life framework. So when it comes back to my tasks of communicating about this and building a culture where we transform to think about active transportation, to think about our impact on health and connecting communities, the language of the quality of life framework gives us entry points to do that, and a shared language that I hope all of you will start to use. It's something that binds us. Now, I'll let Terry talk more about that process and the outcomes of it, but I hope that's a good teaser for you. These panelists were chosen because each of them represents one of the dimensions of quality of life. But I believe that what you'll hear from them is that that's not how the conversation evolves. You'll hear that those ideas mix and mingle, and that's exactly how it should be. So I will turn the time over to each of them to introduce themselves. So if you'll tell everyone your name, what you do, and why you're excited to be part of this, that would be great. We'll start with you, Teresa.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. My name's Teresa Foxley, and I'm with the Economic Development Corporation of Utah. And I am excited to be here because transportation is such a fundamental element of our ability to be involved in Utah's prosperity through keeping people, goods, and ideas moving throughout the state. So thank you.
My name is Greg Bell. I'm delighted to be with you as well. I'm the president of the Utah Hospital Association, and one of our key projects is Get Healthy Utah. I'm here with my partner, the executive director, Sarah Hodson of Get Healthy Utah. Our mission is to promote active living and healthy eating among Utahns. And we intersect with a lot of other elements in our society, like the healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera. And when we started this journey, we expected that most of our partners would be healthcare, health insurance, those sorts of things. But we found, in fact, that our best and most determined allies tend to be in the active transportation area. And we've been quite surprised by that, but delighted at the many partnerships we've made with these folks here, with UDOT, with UTA, and others.
I'm Terry Newell, Deputy Director of Planning Investment for UDOT, and I'm not sure on my process here. Am I just doing quick intro and later we're going to talk? Okay, very quickly then. I am glad to be at UDOT and be able to I think about my role as Carlos sets out a vision for us, and you heard the goals he has and where he wants us to go with active transportation, and Heidi's doing a great job of the grassroots level, and I feel like maybe my job is to kind of squeeze that middle section of the organization and help us get that culture change throughout. So that's my role with it.
Thank you.
I'm Carlton Christensen. I'm chair of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority, and we're excited because we know that this is really about creating our community. And we've had a long history at UTA in trying to be part of nearly every community where we serve, and we know that the communities evolve and develop, and we can be strategic in that, and not only moving people, but more importantly, keeping people healthy and ready to be part of the community.
Thank you. So now we'll hear a few minutes from each of our panelists about what they're doing, and they'll dig in a little more than just telling you what their jobs are. And we are going to start with Terry. And I've got the clicker for you guys, so if you'll just tell me when you're ready to move on.
All right, awesome.
Oh, was I supposed to talk about Brown's partners? Sorry. Here they are, everyone. I imagine we'll return to this. There might be a couple slides. Okay. Oh, yeah, silver. I feel like I should go back. Everybody should get some airtime here. All right. Go ahead, Terry.
Okay. Okay. So Carlos talked about our Utah's transportation vision process, and Teresa participated in that, and Greg participated in that, and we had a number of people around the table trying to talk about what we wanted as a state. Again, quality of life is what we're all going for. Important thing for us to keep in mind, and although it's simple, it really allows us to answer all those questions. We have those hard choices to make. Is what we're doing contributing to quality of life is an important thing to think about. I'll have you click. But underneath that, you have to have some more specific things. So we start to go a little further into it. We came up with these 4 pieces of framework that really guide how we want to do our work and how we're going to work together. And we have a diverse panel up here because we all need to work together to deliver that right transportation system. I'll have you go one more because I think it gets me to, so Carlos talked a lot about culture and changing the culture in our organization. And part of changing that culture, there's a lot of good discussions that need to occur, but then we also have to put processes in place that help us get there. So this is kind of a process slide here. What we're doing with that framework we have from Utah's transportation vision is now having that help us figure out how to prioritize our projects. And when we prioritize our projects, we are going to directly look at these 4 categories. And then you see elements under each one. Good health, when we talked to our Transportation Commission about this, I said, here's something new that we have not measured for UDOT before. But this is how we're going to be picking our projects and how we're going to be prioritizing the work we do. And so when we talk about putting processes in place, when how we choose our projects is guided by this, that's a very strong process. And as part of that, we have a piece of it under, I'm going to try to figure out which one, I believe it's under public health, that you get extra points in the process if your project is doing something for active transportation. And so you have a chance when you're a project manager to change that description of your project, and you potentially can score better if you add an element of active transportation. I was talking to my friend Sean Seeger this morning. He said, oh, so they can game the system. And then he pretty quickly changed that around. It's like, no, it's not gaming the system. It's incentivizing the behavior that we want. So Carlos says what we want from the stage. We also have a process in place that is going to encourage people to make those decisions that we think are the important ones that get us to active transportation. So we've got to pair the culture change with the process in order to actually fully make it happen. I'm not sure what my last slide is, so I'll have you click. I think there's one more. Yes, okay. This is a good one. So we have 2 big funding sources. We have our Transportation Investment Fund and our Transit Transportation Investment Fund. So those 2 big categories, within each one of those, we can now fund active transportation projects. We were not able to do that in the past, and because of legislation last year, we're able to do that. So you see under TIF, active, we'll actually be able to accept nominations for standalone active transportation projects, which is a great new source of funding that's going to help us finish important connections. And then under TTIF, we'll be able to do important first mile, last mile projects. So those are 2 new things for us that I think are going to be really important in progressing forward. It's great to have the conversation, but if there's no money to go with it, how are you going to accomplish it? So I think that's, okay.
That's
I'll stop at
excellent,
that.
is what that is. Okay, thank you, Terry. And we'll go to Greg now.
Okay, pardon me. My great-grandfather, Robert Wallentyne, was a farmer in Paris, Idaho. And at the end of the day, he routinely reviewed his iPhone steps. And he found that he had usually between 18 and 25,000, except in threshing season, it would go up to 40 and 45,000. And so he and my grandmother, great-grandmother, and then his children were always looking for labor-saving devices. And they never did go to Gold's Gym. They would drive by Gold's Gym in Montpelier, but they didn't ever go in because he weighed probably about 138 pounds and was made of gristle. They did an autopsy and they found out that there was no body fat, that he was only gristle. And even though he didn't go to Gold's Gym. But we have found labor-saving devices. And so we don't walk 45,000 steps during threshing season, and we're not made of gristle. The people who are most like that today, they don't even live on tractors because they have air conditioning and, they have a lot of conveniences. They live in Manhattan, and they run for taxis and they run for the subway. And they just walk 2 blocks and they just walk, right? Well, the thing about great-grandfather Wallenstein was physical activity was built into his daily life, and he wanted less of it. And his sweet wife, when you read what she did and what her daughters did, they got up at 4 and they cooked first breakfast. Sounds like the Hobbits. But they had the early breakfast, and that was just pancakes and things like that. That was light. And then they had the second breakfast around 8, and that was steaks and eggs and pie and so on and so forth. Then immediately they would get their wood stoves outside. This is in 90 to 100 degree weather. They would cook again, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you see the point I'm making is that we have lost in the flow of our daily lives physical activity. We just aren't active because our lives don't make us be active. Consequently, we have some problems. So if you notice the first slide, notice in 1969, or read it, Teresa, 89, I brought my young interpreter here. So the blue line is the straight line projection of the number of Utahns who are obese, and it's the trend line. And so by 2050, it's expected that half of us will be obese, meaning that we are all 30% or more over normal ideal body weight. So the green line is the current rate, and the U.S. rate in Utah, and the U.S. rate is the upper blue line, solid line. Okay, next slide. So active transportation is a real key because, a lot of people go to Gold's Gym, but most of us have a hard time. Life is draining, life is demanding, and whether you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, or whether you're employed full-time or school or whatever, working exercise into your schedule is very, very difficult. Optimally, your daily life ought to be part of that. My wife and I had the chance to spend some time in Vienna, and we didn't rent a car. We just got an apartment. It wasn't downtown, but it was 3 subway stops away. And so we walked 2 blocks to the transit every morning, and then we went to the museum and walked through the museum, and then we'd go home for lunch, or we'd go somewhere else, and then we'd rent a bike and drive around, and then we'd go somewhere else. And the number of steps approached Great-Grandpa Wallenstein's. And the people there crowd into subways, and they have incredible restaurants and bakeries in the subway stations. I mean, these subway stations are 2 blocks long, and people are running and walking, and they just look healthy. And you can get anywhere you want by trains and transit and buses, and it's very easy to decide for now. We don't have that mass of ridership that would enable that, but it's kind of a neat lifestyle in that regard. Physical inactivity is linked closely to some really difficult health conditions, type 2 diabetes, anxiety, and premature death. Not a great outcome. Next. So adults in America spend 6 hours a day being sedentary, and many of you are much more than that. I have a hard time not being at my desk for 9 or 10 hours. And even though I'm active and exercise and I try to get up and around, we're just sedentary. Only half of Utah's adults and 19% of adolescents meet recommended amount of physical activity. Each additional hour per day spent in a car increases your likelihood of obesity 6%. 99% of all bicycle trips are taken by people over the age of 18. when I was growing up in Helper, Utah, I went everywhere. My parents said it was in the Constitution, it was in the Mormon Word of Wisdom, it was in the Holy Script received from the Wallentines and others. You didn't drive kids anywhere. They can walk and they have bikes, period. And I know that's a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. Now kids don't take bike trips, right? They don't, because they might get kidnapped, and I don't want to minimize legitimate concerns. Anyway, next slide. Okay, residents living in places with more active transportation have lower obesity rates than otherwise. In 1969, almost half of children walked or biked to school, and that's now 13%. Next. Walkable communities create relationships. I had a big front porch in Ogden on Jackson Avenue, and my dad was a community sage, and he was such a neat guy, and we'd just be sitting there talking in the evening. Two things wiped out the American neighborhood: air conditioning, right, and television. That's when people left the front porch, and that's when they quit knowing their neighbors. But in those days, George Bell sat out there and held forth. And the people in the neighborhood would walk down and, George, what do you think? He says, well, I read in Time, and he'd tell them what was up. Those were bonding teaching experiences that we kind of don't have anymore. Next slide. We did a focus group with community leaders and found that public health is only a mid-level concern for them. So think about if you're a city leader, what are you worried about? You're worried about stuff under the ground. You're worried about water, sewer, roads, parks, sometimes swimming pools, and community recreation programs. But you're not worried about public health. Okay, next. This is way too complicated for your small minds. So let's just skip this one. All right, I'm done.
All right. We'll go to Teresa now.
That was too good. Elizabeth, we went to high school together. We're
Yeah,
friends.
we
How can
did.
you put me after this?
I'm sorry.
Again, Teresa Foxley, thank you so much for letting me be here. One of the reasons I love presenting at conferences like this is we get the chance to demystify some of what goes into economic development and corporate recruitment, which is EDC Utah's specialty. So our core competencies as an organization are really researching Utah's competitive economic advantages, marketing those competitive advantages to business decision makers, and then doing corporate recruitment project management on the back end of that. And our mission is to act as a catalyst for quality jobs and capital investment in the state. And it's important, that word catalyze, because we don't actually have any assets as an organization. We don't own real estate. We certainly don't control the labor force in the state. We don't manage our transportation system. So really, our job is just to understand what exists in the community and how that might be a match for companies that want to create great high-paying jobs here in the state. And I've had the good fortune over the last decade or so of being a part of or observing the economic development ecosystem in the state, and particularly the corporate recruitment functions of the state. And it has evolved so much in the decade or so that I've been involved or that I've been observing it. And I say that because when I first started in economic development, the things that really seemed to matter to companies that we were working with had a lot to do with the bottom line. And so we were doing a lot of research on Utah's competitive advantages in our energy markets and our competitive lease rates and labor costs and all of the sort of things that would go into a business input that might give Utah a bit of a competitive edge as compared to other markets that they were thinking about locating their business. And I've seen a really complete transition of that over the last 10 years, and I think that has a little bit to do with where we are in the business cycle. Obviously, we've been in the midst of a very long expansion, both here in the state and also in the national and global economy, which has led to tighter labor markets. But I think it also has a lot more to do with the sophistication and maturation of this place, of this market, of what Utah is. And so how we position the state has changed pretty significantly in that decade's time. So I mentioned that we do a lot of research on Utah's competitive advantages, but first we have to understand how we are perceived in our marketplace or with the site selectors that we market to. And so periodically we survey these site selectors, and for those of you who don't know or for whom that profession is sort of a mystery to, they're business advisors. If you're a company and you're thinking about making a big expansion, but that's not something that you do every day because you're selling widgets every day, you might hire a site selector to analyze where a supply chain would be for you, or where a great logistics system would be for you, or an overall business climate, or more and more where the talent pool that you're seeking resides. And so we periodically survey these site selectors, and according to our most recent survey, we found that 3 of the top 5 site selection criteria relate to talent. So it's talent availability, talent cost, and talent quality. And then rounding out the top 10 include a lot of things related to transportation. And of course that makes sense because you're working with corporations who are trying to get perhaps executives in and out of markets. You're trying to bring in your funding partners, your clients, and you're trying to make sure that you can access the best labor pool possible. And so I don't think it would be any surprise to anyone here to learn that those many of those top decision criteria relate to talent. But then how do we think about talent in relation to transportation and mobility? And it's just absolutely fundamental. It's fundamental for a bunch of reasons. One, just the actual nuts and bolts of citing a company somewhere and drawing a 30-mile or 30-minute commute time radius around them, and who they will be able to bring into to staff work and make that operation function at the highest and most efficient way, in the highest and most efficient way possible. But more importantly, when I think about that equation, okay, great, today we've got to get people to the companies. We've got to get people better opportunities. But what does it really, really mean? People are mobile. Everybody is aware of the fact that Utah has had a very high net in-migration rate. Over the last 3 years, 100,000 net new migrants have moved into the state. So in other words, people are choosing where they want to live based on a number of different factors, and of course a strong economy is one of them, but quality of life and cost of living is a huge, huge part of that. And so we are thinking a lot more about qualitative factors that go into site selection and quality of place as an overall an underlying function of our economic development strategy, because without quality of place, we won't be able to maintain quality of people. And that is really what our organization has started to pivot into. And so, interestingly enough, these site selectors that we market to are also pivoting to that. I had a conversation over dinner a couple of weeks ago with a really prominent site selector, one that we market to regularly. And he told me this really interesting story, which was, Teresa, I used to do a lot of research myself on behalf of my clients on those things that we just talked about, lease rates, utility rates, et cetera. He said, now, you know what they're having me do? Go out and map the number of parks per square mile in a community where we are thinking about locating. And I'm sending out my research analysts to actually figure out how frequently and how high quality and how consistent the bus service is in these communities. And I just thought, wow, that is a huge shift in the way that our marketing targets are evaluating us as a community. So we've undertaken a pretty big initiative that we call quantifying the qualitative. And the idea behind this is, okay, if these guys are going out and we all know that a park will improve our quality of life. It's a great community gathering space. It helps us, if we can take active transportation to a park and then recreate in there, that's all better for our health. But how do we then turn around and quantify those amazing qualitative assets in our community? And so you'll see more from us on a marketing standpoint in terms of quantifying those quality of life elements. We just last year published a first of its kind arts and entertainment in the state of Utah, and those are projects that we're looking to do more work around. So I am excited and encouraged by this conference because I would love to partner in even greater depths and in greater ways with those of you here in this room and at this table on how we can continue to quantify some of that qualitative, some of the qualitative things in this community that do make it the best place in the state to live. So, thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Carlton.
I've decided that Greg, my wife, and my physician got together for his presentation, so thanks for the guilt trip. I guess that's what I get. I put a remote control plug on my irrigation controller because I hated to go out to unplug it to reset the internet on it. But we need to get moving, so. I just wanted to introduce our board. Last November, the legislature modified the board of directors for the Utah Transit Authority to 3 full-time member boards. My colleagues are here, Beth Holbrook and Kent Millington, and our new executive director, Carolyn Gannott. And we're excited as a team to be partners with each of you and with UDOT, who are great partners as we go forward. Next slide. We know that there's not a solution. One solution is not the right solution for everybody, and it's a myriad of solutions as we look going forward. My colleague Jaron Robertson, who's here today, is working on looking at new modes of transportation. And as you add and you look at our fleet, there's the core systems of light rail, bus, and commuter rail. But our van pools, for example, 400 van pools, and we go as far north as Malada, Idaho, because they're commuting to Hill Air Force Base. And each of these communities, as they look for alternatives to this transportation, are important steps. In the next week or so, we'll be working with and opening the first green bike station outside of Salt Lake City. As we look at those interfaces along the way, those are important in making and connecting in those last miles. This last summer, I had the joy, my daughter was a charger for one of the scooter systems, and I figured it was the time to talk to her, so we drove around, and it was amazing where those scooters got left. And those connections, so they're part of the mix. And then as we look at other ways of microtransit and other means, all need to be part of that equation. Next slide. We know that to make transit as a first choice, we have to look at our system. We have to look at it in a wholesale way. We need to look at both the frequency and the span of service. We just recently completed a service choice process, and we had a lengthy discussion as a board. We had a lot of input from community leaders. And one of the interesting and consistent feedbacks that we got is that they want a system that encourages higher ridership. Not by great lengths. They know that there are communities that still need some coverage, and we'll rethink how that coverage is provided. But they want more ridership. They want more frequency. And as we look at a system going forward, that's an important piece of that. I think we look at smart land use, and I know my colleague's going to talk about our transit-oriented development, and there are those here today that are partners with us, but they enhance riderships. They're important to the companies that occupy those buildings, as Teresa's pointed out. There is a cost to free parking, and we have to look at those, and those are real, and we also have to look at our fare structure. We're commencing in a project to relook at our fare structure. It's, to be honest, it's regressive toward those in the low-income category, and we have to think about how we look at that. Next slide. But we can make smart transportation investments. While we're limited right now for major transportation projects, there are incremental connections and lines through key routes that we can and are working on. We just recently celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the opening of the UVX line. An interesting fact that's not on this slide, but with 3,000 new students at UVU, they sold 1,200 fewer parking passes. That's important land that the university can use for academic purposes. And then when BYU, which was the second university, opened its door, opened for the semester, ridership was 14,000 passengers a day on that system. On game day between the University of Utah, we handled 17,000 passengers, our all-time high. And so this system provides, and 2/3 of those passengers are part of our EdPass program. So even though it's currently free, they could ride the system, and they do ride on our commuter rail system going up and down the Wasatch Front. I just would note that as part of this system was done, additional things are often connected in these communities that enhance this effort. For example, 1.4 miles of additional bike lanes were added as part of the project. The bike trail under the Provo River Bridge was elevated out of floodplain. There completed sidewalks along University Parkway, new ADA compliant local bus stops were installed, and our own studies have shown whenever we improve those bus stops, not only does ridership improves, but the request for paratransit service diminishes because individuals are more independent and can make their connections. Water-wise landscaping, 300 additional trees and intersections upgraded, pedestrian systems upgraded, and then multi-use paths were put in along 900 East. So we always have to look, and UDOT was an excellent partner in this and very instrumental in this being a successful project. And so as we go forward, these partnerships and these outcomes are an important thing to look at. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. Each of you exemplifies passion, not just for the areas that you're here to represent, but for the shared goals that we're working on. And in the spirit of that, we're now going to have a dialogue among each of you, but I will throw questions to you. Please feel free to react to each other in real time. Teresa, I'm going to go ahead and throw the first one to you. You've got a very different perspective on what the future of our active transportation system might look like, what we would hope that it looks like in the short to midterm, but also in the long term, like 30 years out. So if we could hear from you what you would ideally like to see.
Well, I'm so energized by some of the innovations that you see in transportation, transit, micromobility, vertical mobility. I just think that the landscape 10, 15, 30 years from now is going to be so different from today, and that excites me for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is that I think Utah can be home to a lot of those new innovations, particularly in some of the autonomous solutions that we're seeing. I always joke, I have a little boy who will be 3 this year, and I remember my parents telling me that the most anxiety-inducing experience that they had through parenting was when I took and failed my first driver's test. And so my hope would be that my little boy does not ever actually have to take a driver's test, that he could have enough active transportation options, autonomous options, and micromobility solutions to be able to get where he needs to go without inducing that anxiety in me. But I think that there's a lot of steps that have to be taken first. Those things to me include, I think, a lot of protected lanes. So, Carlos, one of the big word bubbles that popped up in your word cloud was safety, and I think that today is either a perceived or an actual impediment to getting people out and incorporating active transportation into their daily life. So I'd like to see in the near term more protected lanes so that we can tear down that barrier for getting people more active.
Fantastic, thank you. And Greg, maybe you would be able to comment on that too as you learn about potential barriers and also benefits of active transportation for people you talk to, what you've heard, and then also what are your hopes and dreams for the future of active transportation?
Well, thank you. You know, in another context, we had a national consultant join us, and we had a full-day planning session. This was when Utah ran its own healthcare exchange about 10 years ago. And this guy was a veteran of Washington, D.C. He'd been a state insurance commissioner. He spent the whole day with us, and we had about 40 or 50 in the room. At the end of the day, he said, I have never, ever, and he had been insurance commissioner in Oregon and also in Pennsylvania, as well as an official in the Obama administration. He said, I've never, ever witnessed anything like I've seen today. And I said, what is that? And he said, well, in Utah, the way you work together and collaborate is nothing short of miraculous. I said, really? What are you talking about? And he said, well, number one, everybody was in the room today who needed to be there to make a decision. Number two, we had full information, and everybody was honest about it, about their point of view and their interest. And thirdly, you stayed. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, public officials just don't, they come and give speeches and then they leave. And that's not rare in Utah. We have senators and representatives and, Carlos is here today. This is not just some one-off deal. And so anyway, this guy concluded by just telling me he felt like Utah has a magic. And it's really true. We are a big enough state that we don't need to follow anybody else. We can set our own course, and we're small enough that you can turn the boat. You can really turn the boat in Utah, except for public education. You can't turn that boat. There's still too many steering wheels. But in transportation, Carlos could have had dozens of jobs. And he has stayed here and been with us, and I'm telling you, we have benefited from his vision, his foresight, his humility, his involvement of a team like he has with Terry and Heidi and his Elizabeth, the top flight team he has. So I'm sorry to embarrass him, but this kind of an attitude is remarkable. Now, substantively, I hope you saw the Deseret News piece about clean air and comparing us to Oslo. And I just found it fascinating because she didn't go to Milan or, someplace in Spain, Barcelona, where there's warm weather. She went to Sweden. And you may remember, it gets cold there. I stepped out of the building in Copenhagen on the sidewalk, huge sidewalk, and all of a sudden I look up and I hear ding, ding, ding. I hear 1,000 people dinging their bells at me because unbeknownst to me, I'm on a certain part of the sidewalk where thousands of bikes are coming at me. And it was a, see your life in short order kind of experience. And I'm not saying we're going to get there, just like I don't know that we'll ever get to Vienna's transit system. But under the leadership we have now, it's all of the above. The options are so replete. There are so many. And Carlos said it right. Don't push. Don't mandate. We can't mandate. But as we permit, enable, and incentivize, we're going to get there. We really have one of the most agile transportation agencies in UDOT, and then UTA is absolutely a gem. I was fired so Carlos could have this, so Carlton could have this job. I was chair of the board, and the legislature shot the agency out from under me. It was just very rude what they did. But they got a much bigger, better guy in it, and he and Beth and Ken are just doing terrific work. So I'm really excited about that. And then I was in Washington, D.C., and the number of commuters on scooters is stunning. Brigham Young didn't plan their streets, and so they have really one of the most horrible commuting situations in the world in Washington, D.C. Don't be a congressman for that and other reasons. But to see the adaptation of scooters and bikes, et cetera, Lyft, Uber, it's really getting exciting. So I forgot what question I'm answering actually. But I'll just say this, that the options and these buzzwords, multimodal, it's just fabulous. I'm just so excited about it.
Thank you. And Carlton, it feels appropriate to offer you the opportunity for a rebuttal, and then we can hear your dreams.
Well, I'm not sure they got better, but they did get bigger. It's interesting to me, and on behalf of Brigham Young, shame on you that left the plot of Zion. And I say that from the standpoint, not so much from a religious piece, but the cross section, the streets or the things, the pattern known as the plot of Zion locally, is very conducive to transit. It makes for much better bus lanes. And in my former role at Salt Lake County, we did a county-wide active transportation plan where we integrated all the local plans. And one of the challenges we ran into is all the communities south of about 7200 South, the only way we could connect those communities was on a state highway managed by UDOT. And not that that was a bad alternative, but it meant that those communities really didn't interface very well, and certainly not in a safe way, because we were trying to find routes that...
Because of the way they laid out narrow streets and
the way they were...
Subdivisions.
Yeah, they just weren't very conducive to that challenge. Now, that's not to say those are bad communities or we can't serve them in some fashion or another, but it severely limits what you can do. But as you go forward, it's something that we have to think about, particularly as we redo, old urban and suburban retail centers and look at perhaps smaller versions of that and how those are laid out. Those lend themselves to opportunities as they're redeveloped that could be much more conducive to a healthy and productive lifestyle.
Thank you. And then Terry.
Can I have a comment and a question?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I won't tell you who that's going to be. I asked the question to yet, but so I've been thinking about a couple of things that I look forward to the day when we don't have to have incentives for people to think about active transportation, that it just becomes, as we talked about, part of how we think about our system. And I would love to see the day when we can have the right infrastructure in place that people can bike and scooter, electric bikes, electric scooters. We can't quite figure out where they fit in our system right now, and when we have a place for that. Because I look back at the picture Heidi had of getting some of our people out on the scooters and bikes, and I'll say one thing in common with that and our Transportation Commission when we had an active transportation tour for them in Moab, the grins ear to ear. It's transportation, but it's transportation that's happy at the same time. And I think that was one thing that was really infectious. And I had a couple of people ask me at our last commission meeting, when are we going to do another one of those with active transportation? And it's like, that's meaningful. That means something. People are asking for it. And so how do we put the right infrastructure in place so you don't have to be worried about your child riding somewhere, that we've got a safe system that they can use. So that's what I look forward to. I think one of the difficulties we have, like I live in an area that was built out in the late 50s, and we don't even have sidewalks in our neighborhood, and it's very tough later to fit those improvements in, and those are going to be hard lifts for us, and those are really hard conversations. There's just not a lot of space left. So I don't know how we solve that, but that leads me to my question for Teresa, which is, I'll go out on a limb here and say that we try to entice companies to come to Utah by showing off what we have. Do we have the conversations to ask the companies to contribute to our active transportation infrastructure in a meaningful way? Are we having those conversations, and what are we doing to get them to, we're trying to get them to come here, incentivize them with the great things we have, but how do we get them to make sure they add to it? And are those conversations going on?
Yeah, that's such a great question, and I think it's such a fair one for the community to be asking me and for us to be in turn speaking with our clients about. We want to grow high-value companies in the state of Utah, and the definition of high value, I think, is a continuous involvement. When EDC Utah was created, it was because our economy was pretty, it was not diverse. We were very reliant on construction and on the extractive industries, and so there was a unified effort to say, okay, let's diversify the economy, and let's do that to address a brain drain. And I think it's fair to evolve what a high-value company means, which is today not only creating a diversity of industry and a quality of job, but also contributing to the community in whatever way that might be. And that could be through investments in workforce training programs or through partnering with our agencies on active transportations or other community priorities. But having this conversation about what our community does prioritize, I think helps enable us to go out and facilitate that type of dialogue between us and the companies that we're working with. I want to just highlight, I think everyone here has probably very fair and valid critiques of the Amazon HQ2 process, but there are a few things that you can learn from it, which were, one, what was in the RFP for Amazon HQ2? Aside from some of the financing pieces, it was a real focus on tell us about your transportation and transit systems. And then if you see what is going on in Virginia, which successfully won one of the HQ2 sites, the way that that deal and that project was structured was essentially most of the economic benefit that will be generated in the state of Virginia as a result of that 25,000 person project is being reinvested back into workforce training programs and mobility programs. And so I think that set a new model in economic development, and particularly in large project partnerships between public agencies and between companies on how we ought to be thinking about the ways in which we partner with companies. So.
May I also just mention that the UVX project was only enabled because UVU and BYU were able to offset the fare reduction in large measure from UTA. So as Governor Herbert often says, we need private-public partnerships, and I thought that was a sterling example, Carlton, of one that worked.
Well, Terry, that was a good segue into our next question, which is, Greg, you mentioned that we have a really exceptional community here where we work well with each other. And so the question that I have for you is a question for you to put out to someone else, which is, how can somebody on this stage help you achieve what you want to achieve?
Great question. I think we just heard that every one of us is evolving, right? I mean, we're not the same as we were 20 years ago. We stayed the same for years and years and years. We did the same thing. But I don't know what it is. There are just so many more inputs. Climate change. There's legitimate concern about our air quality. Teresa's worried about it because are we going to be locked down from an economic development standpoint? Kind of Associated Foods and all the other trucking companies located here, are they going to be able to function because of air quality constraints, quality of life concerns that we're selling to others? So, we're all facing new considerations. I think one of the emerging considerations has got to be the health of our citizens. It is not just the Department of Health or a county health agency or our health systems who need to worry about the health of its citizens. This becomes a school education issue, a higher education issue, a transit issue, transportation issue. It's something we have to pay attention to. We are killing our population. One of the most devastating effects of Americanization to Hispanics and Pacific Islanders is that they adopt the American diet and especially in lower income strata, and they become obese, and the coincident diseases become just terrible. And the social stigma around so many of these conditions. So we're not doing a good job as government and as institutions, and it's such a difficult thing to talk about, right? I mean, you talk about incentivize or police or push, it ain't gonna happen. What people eat and when they eat and how and when they exercise and so on, it's the most individual of choices. It's a lifestyle. It's like religion. It's something the public is going to have lesser effect on. But it's something we need to all come together about. So what these partners can help me with at Get Health Utah is to raise the level, and you notice UDOT's done that. One of the 4 values is to consider the health of the public. And so I'd ask each of you as well, city planners and others, to build that in, to make that a criterion. How can we enable people to make convenient and build into their lives physical activity and healthy eating?
Thank you. I know we want to leave a few minutes for the audience to ask questions, but before we do that, I do want to keep the floor open if any of the 3 of you would like to put out a specific way that one of your partners could support you.
I think, and it's certainly happening, I think our partnership with UDOT is an important piece of that conversation, because every time we have a transportation decision, the conversation, when Carlos was telling his story, I remember sitting in a late meeting before the Olympics, and the prior director of UDOT was there, and we were looking at the light rail going up to the university, and one of the accommodations is we had to have 2 left-hand turn lanes along 400 South, And anyway, we worked out the deal that night. It was like a Monday night. It was 11th hour to try to make that deal work, but today that conversation is growing more aligned to, what is the right transportation for these corridors. It's hard now to create a new corridor, so we have to take advantage of the ones we're in, and so that's strategically aligning the right solution through there, and often it can and should be multiple options. As active transportation becomes part of each of our corridors, those are important there. So, I would welcome that continued dialogue and support from UDOT.
Thank you. Terry, would you like to?
You got it, Carlton.
Do you have a request?
I think I made my request of Teresa, but maybe I will say for Greg, the more you can help us explain the health benefits of changing our transportation system, I think the more it helps us justify how we spend the money on that system.
And Teresa.
I would love to sit down with Greg and others in the health community to scope out some metrics around how economic development and health might be able to work a little bit better together. It's been a conversation that I don't think we've had, so I would love that.
If you want a sense of economic development, go up Mill Creek Canyon at 5 o'clock. Be at Mill Creek Canyon at 5 o'clock, halfway up. Find a little parking lot, and just hold on. Don't get on the trail, because people get out of Subarus with giant dogs, and they're up that hill on bikes and whatever, conveyance they are. And they just left InStructure or Domo or whatever, you know. They left our good companies, and they might have grown up here, they might not have. But for them, the mountains are not once in a while, and they're not to look at. It's an integral part of the day, of their life, of the quality of life. And in a way, we're loving them to death, we understand. But that's why people stay here, that's why people come here. And so we have got to do everything to preserve all of that from overuse, but also facilitate the use and make it just as wonderful and usable as possible, because it's just so meaningful to us all. And in Vision Utah, we found really two great values that people stay here. One is the environment, you know, the red rock, the mountains, the lakes, the sunshine, just the beautiful place we live in. And the other one was the social, moral environment, the good values here, the friendliness, the warmth, the good culture. So we've got to keep those two things in mind. And it really comes down to both the natural and the built environment. But I'd love to have more conversations, and we will.
Wonderful. Well, I want to be respectful of the schedule, and I have received authorization to take 2 questions, so get ready to sprint. The microphones are right here, and if you want to come up and tell us your name and who your question is directed to, we'd love to hear from you.
My name is Locke Ettinger. I'm the new director of the Rural Health Association of Utah. I commend you all for your great work. I'd like to know, in regards to rural health, as I've been touring all of our rural communities throughout Utah, certainly these issues are in those areas as well. There's a lot of focus here on the Wasatch Front. And with regards to actually lower health and disparities in our rural communities, what are your considerations? And it's really for the panel, not any individual, because it affects economic growth, whether it's healthy eating and active living, or whether it's transportation. All those things go into those smaller communities. So how are you thinking about rural Utah?
You know, one of the great discoveries in taking this job is that there's 5 other transit agencies in Utah. And last April, my colleagues and I sat down with commissioners in Washington County to talk about the challenge of transportation going into Zion's National Park and the amount of traffic and sometimes that, but as you look at our colleagues in the Uinta Basin, in Cedar City, I'm going to skip a couple here, Park City, Cache Valley, each of those, as they look at it, you know, transit has to be part of that discussion. It may not be our district and because they're outside of our service area, but their corridors are as limited or more limited because of geographical constraints. And so I'm hoping that dialogue, and we've tried to be supportive of them, you know, in a myriad of ways, from purchasing to some planning, but we need to have ongoing dialogue with them.
I spend a lot of time thinking about our rural communities. We're a statewide organization, and our rural communities have, in many instances, a vastly different economic outlook than some of our Wasatch Front communities. And as you mentioned, that does have a huge impact on health. We are working very hard on a program that we call Development Ready Communities, and really is sort of a rural readiness program. So working alongside our rural communities to help them understand what assets do exist, where they might be able to do some product development, and how they can market themselves and integrate themselves into the statewide economic development strategy is a big part of where we spend time within our organization today. So that's something that we certainly think about incredibly frequently. And I mentioned probably multiple times about the equation that every company is trying to solve today, and that's a talent equation. And there are really talented individuals in our rural communities, some who've been displaced, others who've not entered into the workforce. And so working with other partners to try and matchmake amongst Wasatch Front companies from out of state, and those that might be able to employ rural Utahns that tend to have higher rates of unemployment than they do here along the Wasatch Front.
That was not me.
Somebody's alarm went off. Do we have to stop? Or
Go ahead, Terry.
Okay. I think one of the things we talk a lot about in planning is the context, and there is a difference, in the rural and urban environment, but just because you're in a rural area doesn't mean that people don't want active transportation. And I'll get Senator Winterton out here from Duchesne, and we met several times and with politicians, local government from Vernal, and they want active transportation. They want a plan for trails and are actively trying to provide those as well. So I think some of the same things, even though we talk about Wasatch Front, some of those same things still apply to rural communities. Slightly different context, but I think they want some of those same active transportation benefits, health outcomes that we're looking for in an urban area.
Never mind, you get one. You got one. Thank you so much to each of you. We have wellness succulents for them as well.
Yeah,
All right.
can everyone give a warm welcome or thank you to our panel. And if there's any specific questions, I'm sure the panelists can mingle up here for a few minutes if you want to come grab them and ask a question. Let's just bump our agenda back about 5 minutes. Feel free to head out to our next breakout sessions. Again, parking validations are at the registration desk, and our breakout rooms are in Arizona, Wyoming, and Idaho, and posters are in front of each. Thank you so much.